Hello guys, I'm Tom, and today we're going to explore who Hannibal Lecter is. One of the most fascinating, disturbing, and complex characters in modern fiction is undoubtedly Dr. Hannibal Lecter. Elegant, cultured, and impeccably mannered, he is at the same time a relentless predator, capable of combining prodigious intelligence with unimaginable brutality. Throughout his story, both in cinema and literature, we have seen how this refined psychiatrist and cannibalistic killer moves between two worlds, that of high culture, where he dazzles with his erudition and charm, and that of absolute darkness, where he plans and executes crimes with chilling precision. That's why, in this video, I will explain in detail the history and origins of Hannibal Lecter. To do so, I will first summarize his story across the different films, then discuss his physical appearance, his personality, and his incredible known skills and weaknesses. Hannibal Lecter was born in 1933 in the heart of Lithuania into an aristocratic family with deep historical roots and considerable wealth. He grew up in a privileged environment, surrounded by comforts, culture, and an exquisite education that combined the best of European tradition with a refined sensitivity toward art, music, and literature. His childhood unfolded among idyllic landscapes and well-kept gardens, with the inseparable company of his younger sister, Misha, whom he adored and protected with pure and unconditional affection. However, the shadow of World War II loomed over Europe, and when the Nazi war machine advanced eastward, the Lecter family's life was changed forever. The family tried to protect themselves by moving to their country estate, an isolated place among forests and hills that had once been a refuge for happy summers. But the war respected neither walls nor memories. An air raid brutally ended the lives of his parents, leaving Hannibal and Misha orphaned in a collapsing world. Shortly afterward, in the chaos following the offensive, they were captured by a group of armed marauders, men hardened by hunger and desperation. What happened in that remote place would become the defining event of Hannibal's life. The men, driven by extreme hunger, murdered little Misha and consumed her, forcing Hannibal himself to eat part of his sister. The act not only plunged him into unbearable pain, but also planted in him absolute hatred and a psychological wound that could never be healed, marking the beginning of a metamorphosis that would eventually turn him into something far darker than a mere survivor. After the conflict ended, the boy was sent to a Soviet orphanage, where life was cold, harsh, and devoid of compassion. There, he suffered humiliations, physical abuse, and a constant struggle to maintain his dignity. Young Hannibal, however, was no ordinary child. His intelligence manifested even amid misery, observing and remembering every detail, every face, and every word. When he had the chance, he escaped and crossed Europe to reach France, seeking the protection of his uncle, Robert Lecter, a respected diplomat and scholar. Fate, however, struck again, taking this paternal figure from him as well. He was then taken in by Lady Murasaki, his uncle's refined widow, a woman of Japanese origin who would exert a decisive influence over him. With Lady Murasaki, Hannibal perfected his intellectual training, learning not only languages and sciences, but also philosophy, etiquette, and Eastern culture. He trained in martial arts, fencing, and combat techniques, achieving a level of physical and mental control that complemented his already prodigious intelligence. As he grew, he developed an elegant and sophisticated presence, with impeccable manners and a calculating gaze that few could decipher. But beneath that facade of a cultured and educated young man, the trauma of his childhood simmered silently. Slowly, he began to track the men who had destroyed his life. With meticulous patience and deadly ingenuity, he located each of them, carrying out elaborate acts of vengeance in which death, and occasionally cannibalism, became a personal ritual. These early murders marked the beginning of his path as a refined and meticulous human predator, one who saw in his crimes more than violence. a form of private justice, and a perverse art. Over time, Hannibal left his visible past behind and dedicated himself to building a new identity in which his intelligence shone without limits. He studied medicine and psychiatry in France, where he was already recognized for his prodigious memory, ease of learning, and extraordinary analytical ability. Later, he moved to the United States to continue his training, establishing himself as a brilliant psychiatrist and a prestigious intellectual. To society, he was the perfect example of a cultured man, a sophisticated gentleman, passionate about opera, classical art, and fine cuisine, capable of dazzling in any conversation. His impeccable bearing and charisma completely concealed the predatory nature that lay beneath the surface. However, behind that perfect mask, Hannibal had already claimed numerous lives. His victims were not chosen at random. He carefully selected people who, by his twisted criteria, were vulgar, offensive, or aesthetically displeasing to his ideal world. For him, eliminating these individuals was a form of cleansing, an act of balance, and, in a sense, an artistic expression. His crimes were not impulsive. Each was planned with surgical precision, executed with absolute coldness, and sometimes adorned with gestures that transformed the murder into a macabre work of art. At this point in his life, Hannibal Lecter was no longer just the child marked by tragedy, but a cultivated predator navigating high society, invisible to the law, yet always hungry to perfect his deadly craft. After years of building an impeccable image as a psychiatrist and hiding his true nature behind flawless manners, Hannibal Lecter crossed paths with Will Graham, an FBI agent specialized in criminal profiling. Graham, known for his keen intuition in understanding the minds of serial killers, requested Dr. Lecter's assistance in a particularly complex investigation, the hunt for a criminal whose pattern proved elusive even to the most experienced. At that time, Hannibal still enjoyed complete freedom and prestige, and his private practice presented itself as the refuge of a cultured and meticulous intellectual, a place where no one would imagine a human predator was hiding. However, as Graham worked alongside him, he began to notice subtle signs, small gestures, and inconsistencies. The instinct that had made him an expert on killers whispered that something more lay behind Lecter's mask of sophistication. The revelation came with brutal clarity. The man he had sought help from was none other than the infamous Chesapeake Cannibal, the monster he was trying to catch himself. The discovery precipitated a direct confrontation that nearly cost Graham his life. In an intense and desperate struggle, he managed to seriously wound Lecter, stopping him before he could finish the job. That day marked a turning point for both. Graham would be physically and emotionally scarred by the experience, while Hannibal would transition from a free hunter to a notorious prisoner. He was transferred to a maximum security psychiatric institution designed to house dangerous and irrecoverable minds under the supervision of the ambitious and manipulative Dr. Frederick Chilton. Though deprived of his physical freedom, Lecter retained his most dangerous weapon, his intellect. From his cell, he continued to exert control over anyone who dared approach too closely, maintaining an aura of mystery and power that seemed untouchable even behind bars. Years passed, and fate once again intertwined the lives of Graham and Lecter. A new serial killer, Francis Dollarhide, known as the Red Dragon, was spreading terror. Graham, retired but still reputed as one of the best, was called back to assist in the case. Aware that he needed a mind capable of understanding a predator like Dollarhide, he turned once more to Lecter, establishing contact charged with tension and distrust. Hannibal, ever the master of the mental game, took advantage of the situation to weave a plan of revenge against Graham, manipulating information and the people involved in the case to put him in danger. However, despite his cunning, His attempts to eliminate Graham failed, proving that even the brightest mind can encounter resistance when facing an equally determined opponent. Years later, another new face appeared at Lecter's cell. Clarice Starling, a young FBI trainee with a mix of innocence and determination that did not go unnoticed by him. Sent by her superior Jack Crawford, Clarice's mission was to interview him to gain clues that could lead to the capture of another serial killer, James Gum, nicknamed Buffalo Bill, whose modus operandi involved kidnapping and murdering women to skin them and fashion a macabre suit from their skin. From their first exchange, Lecter perceived in her something different from most agents he had encountered: a sharp mind, a strong moral code, and a vulnerability carefully hidden behind professional discipline. He decided to turn their encounter into a psychological game, establishing a pact in which he would provide fragments of information in exchange for her revealing intimate details of her personal life. This exchange not only fueled the investigation, but also forged a complex and ambiguous connection between them. Lecter developed a twisted fascination with Clarice that blended intellectual respect, psychological attraction, and a kind of appreciation that only he could understand. He recognized in her a moral strength that intrigued and, in a way, challenged him. Ultimately, thanks to Lecter's calculated clues and manipulations, Clarice was able to locate and eliminate Buffalo Bill, closing one of the FBI's most disturbing cases. But while she received recognition for her bravery, Hannibal set in motion a meticulously designed plan to regain his freedom. Taking advantage of a transfer and relying on both his ingenuity and devastating violence, he brutally killed his guards, assumed the identity of one of them, and vanished without a trace. Once again, the outside world found the shadows inhabited by Dr. Hannibal Lecter, free once more to continue his deadly game. After his spectacular escape, Hannibal Lecter disappeared from the radar of the authorities and the FBI, reinventing himself under a meticulously constructed identity. In this new life, he settled in Italy, taking on the role of a distinguished art curator in Florence. There, among historic salons, private collections, and the aura of high culture, Lecter moved with the elegance and refinement that had always defined him, navigating effortlessly among nobles, academics, and collectors. His encyclopedic knowledge of art and impeccable taste made him a respected figure in the most exclusive circles, while his true face remained hidden beneath layers of discretion and sophistication. However, this apparent calm was not eternal. The shadows of his past followed him, along with enemies who had not forgotten their blood debts. One of these enemies was Mason Virger, the only known survivor of an encounter with Hannibal. Virger, a corrupt millionaire with political connections and an inherited fortune, had been brutally disfigured after Lecter subjected him to refined sadism. Drugged and manipulated, Mason inflicted irreparable wounds upon himself under Hannibal's influence. Since then, his life had been reduced to a twisted and vengeful existence, with a single purpose: to capture Lecter, torture him, and ultimately kill him. With his nearly limitless resources, Virger set in motion an elaborate plan involving bribes, informants, and professional hunters, determined to exact his revenge at any cost. Fate, however, soon intertwined the paths of Hannibal and Clarice Starling once again. After a failed ambush orchestrated by Virger and his men, Hannibal and Clarice came face to face once more. The reunion was marked by palpable tension and a difficult-to-define chemistry, an ambiguous connection that oscillated between attraction, mutual respect, and psychological manipulation. Clarice, who had spent years with her career defined by the fame and controversy of her first contact with Lecter, now found herself confronting the man who was both her most dangerous enemy and her most fascinating mystery. Hannibal, for his part, seemed torn between his predatory instinct and a genuine interest in her, an interest that, like everything in his life, was tinged with moral complexity and emotional ambiguity. In the film Hannibal 2001, the story culminates with another masterful escape. Lecter manages to evade law enforcement and Virger's men, leaving Clarice behind with mixed feelings, caught between the relief of survival and the unsettling fascination he exerted over her. His cinematic fate remains open. He continues to roam freely somewhere in the world, always one step ahead of those pursuing him. There is no official death, only the certainty that his brilliant and dangerous mind continues to operate in the shadows. In the universe of the novels, however, the ending takes on a much darker tone. After a series of events in which Lecter displays his full capacity for manipulation, seduction, and psychological control, Clarice ultimately yields, not so much physically as mentally, allowing herself to be drawn into his world. Finally, they flee together, beyond the reach of the law, living in a sort of voluntary exile where Hannibal retains his freedom and companionship, and Clarice, in some way, becomes his ally, though it is never entirely clear whether she does so of her own free will or as the result of carefully orchestrated emotional conditioning. Thus, in the written pages, Hannibal not only survives but obtains what seems to be his deepest desire, a lasting bond with the only person capable of challenging him and understanding him on equal terms. And now, having thoroughly covered his story, I want to talk to you about Hannibal Lecter's physical appearance, what we know about his personality and behavior, and I will explain his incredible known skills and weaknesses. Hannibal Lecter is a man whose presence combines impeccable elegance with a disturbing intensity that seems to seep into every gesture. Of medium-tall height, with a slim but muscular build, he maintains a meticulously cared-for physique, not overly bulky, yet possessing the strength and agility to act swiftly and precisely when required. His face, with balanced and symmetrical features, conveys a sober beauty, marked cheekbones, a defined jawline, and an almost classical equilibrium that, at first glance, might suggest a distinguished intellectual rather than a killer. However, his gaze gives him away. His eyes, of a peculiar color that at certain angles can appear tinged with purple red or crimson, possess a cold, analytical depth capable of unsettling anyone who tries to meet it. There is something hypnotic in the way he observes, as if each blink, each microexpression, is calculated to read and control the person in front of him. His hair, dark and straight, always perfectly styled, reinforces the image of a meticulous man who leaves nothing to chance. His skin is fair and flawless, maintained like the rest of his appearance, and his gestures, measured to the extreme, rarely show genuine emotion. When he smiles, it is a slight expression, loaded with subtext, as if each curve of his lips hides a thought he never fully reveals. In any setting, even behind the bars of a maximum security cell, Hannibal maintains impeccable bearing. His clothing is always in order, his hands clean, his movements controlled with near feline precision. He does not move hurriedly, but with a confident, calculated rhythm, projecting calm even in moments of highest tension. His style of dress reflects his refined taste. Tailored suits, perfectly pressed shirts, silk ties, and shoes polished to a shine. A look that does not seek attention through extravagance, but commands respect and conveys authority. The combination of this sophisticated appearance with the intensity of his gaze creates a disconcerting effect. In his presence, it is easy to momentarily forget that he is a predator, until something in his tone of voice, or the way he fixes his eyes, suddenly reminds you that behind that elegant facade resides a calculating and dangerous mind, always alert, always analyzing, always ready to act with lethal precision. Hannibal Lecter moves through the world with the precision of someone who calculates every word, every glance, and every gesture before executing it. His behavior is a blend of exquisite courtesy and absolute control, projecting the image of a cultured, sophisticated, and educated man, capable of moving naturally through formal dinners, academic conferences, or intimate conversations, without his interlocutor sensing the underlying threat. He speaks in a calm, modulated, and perfectly articulated voice, choosing his words with surgical care, as if each sentence were part of a rehearsed speech meant to seduce, manipulate, or disarm. He never appears hurried or loses his composure, even in extreme situations. On the contrary, he seems to feed off the chaos of others, observing it with an unsettling calm that suggests he has already anticipated every possibility. His interactions with people are marked by refined courtesy, but always with an underlying layer of constant analysis. When he looks at someone, he does not merely see a face. He examines gestures, microexpressions, tone of voice, pauses, and even the slightest tremor, gathering information to understand and manipulate. This scrutiny is not always hostile. He may use it to seduce intellectually, to earn someone's trust, or to humiliate them with precise, accurate observations that leave the other person defenseless. His sense of humor is subtle, ironic, and often macabre, delighting in comments that, to him, are small verbal works of art, yet for others can be unsettling or even disturbing. In his daily life, he avoids vulgarity with an almost aristocratic disdain, and his behavior reflects a personal code in which taste, aesthetics, and intelligence are supreme virtues. This code, however, is not moral in the conventional sense. For Hannibal, murder can be an act of aesthetic justice, a correction of human bad taste, and cannibalism, an extension of his devotion to the exquisite. When he kills, he does so without fury or loss of control. His crimes are meticulously planned, executed cleanly, and sometimes adorned with symbolism that holds artistic meaning for him. Even in the most extreme violence, he maintains elegance. He does not shout, he does not improvise chaotically, but acts with the precision of a surgeon completing a masterpiece. In conversation, he exerts a hypnotic power. He knows when to listen and when to speak, when to provoke and when to comfort. He uses the emotions of others as pieces on a board, guiding his interlocutors toward the conclusions he wants without them realizing they have been led. He is patient, capable of waiting days, weeks, or even years for a plan to come to fruition, and in that time, he never shows impatience. To those who know him only superficially, Hannibal may appear a charming gentleman. To those who see him up close, he is a predator, disguised with perfect manners, a man who not only commits atrocious acts, but transforms them into expressions of his intellect and his unique worldview. Hannibal Lecter moves through the world with the precision of someone who calculates every word, every glance, and every gesture before executing it. His behavior is a blend of exquisite courtesy and absolute control, projecting the image of a cultured, sophisticated, and educated man, capable of navigating formal dinners, academic conferences, or intimate conversations without his interlocutor sensing the latent threat. He speaks in a calm, modulated, and perfectly articulated voice, choosing his words with surgical care, as if each sentence were part of a rehearsed speech designed to seduce, manipulate, or disarm. He never appears rushed or loses his composure, even in extreme situations. On the contrary, he seems to feed on the chaos of others, observing it with an unsettling calm that suggests he has already anticipated every possibility. His interactions with people are marked by refined courtesy, but always with a backdrop of constant analysis. When he looks at someone, he does not merely see a face. He examines gestures, microexpressions, tone of voice, pauses, and even the slightest tremor, gathering information to understand and manipulate. This scrutiny is not always hostile. He may use it to seduce intellectually, to earn someone's trust, or to humiliate them with precise, accurate observations that leave the other person defenseless. His sense of humor is subtle, ironic, and often macabre, delighting in comments that, to him, are small verbal works of art, but for others can be disconcerting or even disturbing. In his daily life, he avoids vulgarity with an almost aristocratic disdain, and his behavior reflects a personal code in which good taste, aesthetics, and intelligence are supreme virtues. This code, however, is not moral in the conventional sense. For Hannibal, murder can be an act of aesthetic justice, a correction of human bad taste, and cannibalism an extension of his devotion to the exquisite. When he kills, he does so without rage or loss of control. His crimes are meticulously planned, executed cleanly, and sometimes adorned with symbolism that holds artistic meaning for him. Even in the most extreme violence, he maintains elegance. He does not shout, he does not improvise chaotically, but acts with the precision of a surgeon completing a masterpiece. In conversations, he exerts a hypnotic power. He knows when to listen and when to speak, when to provoke and when to comfort. He uses the emotions of others as pieces on a board, guiding his interlocutors toward the conclusions he desires, without them realizing they have been led. He is patient, capable of waiting days, weeks, or even years for a plan to come to fruition, and during that time he never shows impatience. To those who know him only superficially, Hannibal may seem a charming gentleman. To those who observe him closely, he is a predator, disguised with perfect manners, a man who not only commits atrocious acts, but transforms them into expressions of his intellect and his particular vision of the world. Hannibal Lecter possesses a set of skills so finely tuned that his mind and body seem to function as a precision machine. His intelligence is extraordinary, with an IQ that allows him to master multiple disciplines: medicine, psychology, psychiatry, art, music, history, literature, languages, and gastronomy. He does not merely accumulate knowledge. He knows how to apply it with mastery to manipulate, persuade, and execute complex plans without leaving loose ends. His memory is nearly photographic. He recalls faces, conversations, gestures, architectural details, and even scents with surgical accuracy, allowing him to reconstruct scenes and deduce patterns that others would overlook. His analytical ability is so deep that, within seconds, he can read a person simply by observing them, identifying insecurities, ambitions, traumas, and hidden desires, using them as tools to direct others' behavior. He is a natural manipulator, capable of inspiring trust and sympathy while completely concealing his true intentions. Physically, though not a visibly muscular athlete, he possesses above-average strength, agility, and endurance, allowing him to physically subdue opponents much larger than himself. His anatomical knowledge gives him a lethal advantage in any confrontation, as he knows exactly where and how to strike, to incapacitate or kill swiftly and efficiently. In the art of escape, he is an absolute master. He has almost superhuman patience for planning and executing elaborate getaways, anticipating every move of his adversaries. His creativity and discipline make him capable of adapting to any environment, from a maximum security cell to a dinner with politicians, without losing control or purpose. Additionally, his culinary talent is not only refined, but transforms him into an artist who turns the kitchen into a stage, combining flavors, textures, and presentations with obsessive care, even when the ingredients are human. However, even a man as formidable as Hannibal has weaknesses. His greatest Achilles heel is his pride. His need to demonstrate intellectual and aesthetic superiority can lead him to take unnecessary risks, leaving clues or provoking his adversaries simply for the pleasure of humiliating them. He also occasionally underestimates the strength of others' emotions. Although he is a master at manipulating them, there are moments when his cold, calculating vision fails to anticipate impulsive reactions that can destabilize his plans. Furthermore, his sophisticated personal code, which dictates whom he kills and why, can limit him or make him act predictably for those who manage to decipher it. Another subtle but real weakness is his tendency to form selective bonds. Though he rarely feels genuine affection, when he encounters someone who sparks his intellectual or emotional curiosity, he may develop an attachment that distracts him from his usual pragmatism, making him vulnerable to betrayal or losing control over his own plans. In essence, Hannibal is the perfect predator, except for the cracks left by his humanity, so well concealed that only a few are capable of detecting them before it is too late.